In 1997, a teenage boy who had been missing for 3 years was suddenly found thousands of miles from home, in Spain, claiming to be Nicholas Barkley, a 13-year-old from Texas who had disappeared without explanation in 1994. For his family, the news was overwhelming. After years of uncertainty and silence, they were finally told their son was alive. But almost immediately, there were differences that were difficult to ignore. His voice sounded unfamiliar, his eyes were the wrong colour, and he appeared noticeably older than the boy who had vanished. Yet despite those differences, the family accepted him and brought him home. This is the true story of Frédéric Bourdin, the man who stepped into someone else's life and almost kept it. In June 1994, 13-year-old Nicholas Barkley left his home in San Antonio, Texas, to play basketball with friends, but he never returned. Police launched a search. Flyers were distributed throughout the city, and investigators spoke with neighbours, friends and classmates. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the investigation produced very little. There was no body, no confirmed sighting, and no clear explanation for what had happened. Eventually, the case grew quiet. Officially, Nicholas was listed as a missing child. For his family, however, the absence never truly ended. Without proof of death, hope lingers, even when it becomes fragile. 3 years later, in 1997, Spanish authorities detained a young man who claimed he was an American teenager. He told officials an extraordinary story. According to him, he had been kidnapped, trafficked across Europe, and abused for years before finally managing to escape. When asked his name, he identified himself as Nicholas Barkley. US authorities were contacted, and eventually the Barkley family received a call that seemed almost impossible after so much time. Nicholas had been found. However, the person telling that story was not Nicholas Barkley. He was a 23-year-old Frenchman called Frédéric Bourdin. By that point, he had already spent years impersonating teenagers across Europe. In several cases, he had successfully convinced authorities that he was a missing or abandoned minor. He often targeted institutions designed to protect vulnerable young people, youth shelters, social services, and police departments responsible for missing children. By presenting himself as a victim, he gained sympathy, protection, and sometimes a place to live. Investigators later estimated that he had assumed dozens of different identities before the Barkley case. Each time he adapted his story, studying how people reacted and refining the performance. In Spain, Frédéric Bourdin told officials an elaborate explanation for the differences in his appearance. He claims the people who kidnapped him had abused him and deliberately altered his appearance so he could not easily be identified. According to his account, they had even injected chemicals into his eyes, which he said explained why their colour had changed. So while the story was dramatic, it also offered explanations for the obvious inconsistencies. Spanish authorities then compared his claim with the open missing person case of Nicholas Barkley. The ages were close enough, the timeline seemed possible, and without immediate evidence to prove otherwise, the process continued. Nicholas's sister eventually travelled to Spain to meet the young man claiming to be her brother. And when she saw him, she said she believed him. There were differences, yes, but she explained that trauma and years of captivity could change a person's behaviour and appearance. So soon afterward, the young man was brought back to Texas. He entered the Barkley household and began living as Nicholas. He shared meals with the family, spoke with relatives, and gradually settled into the life of a boy who had supposedly returned after years of captivity. And publicly, the family maintained that their son had finally come home. Later, Bourdin would say that meeting Nicholas's sister was the moment everything changed. Until then, the impersonation had simply been another attempt to assume an identity. But once a member of the family accepted him, he realised something important. If the family believed him, other people might believe him too. And from that point on, he carefully observed their reactions and adjusted his behaviour to match what they expected to see. When they anticipated trauma, he appeared withdrawn. When questions became too specific, he redirected the conversation. And the more they accepted him, the more confident he became. As the weeks passed, however, doubts began to emerge. Nicholas had had blue eyes, while the young man in the Barclay home had brown. And Nicholas had disappeared at 13, yet this individual appeared noticeably older. He spoke with a French accent, which he attributed to years of abuse and isolation overseas. And he avoided bright rooms and wore hats low over his face. When people asked about specific childhood memories, his answers remained vague and carefully controlled. So for some observers, the inconsistencies became harder to ignore. A private investigator began examining photographs of Nicholas taken before his disappearance and comparing them with the young man now living in Texas. He studied facial structure, jaw alignment, and the spacing of features. But eventually, he focused on something small but permanent: the ears. Ears do not significantly change shape with age, trauma, or captivity, and they did not match. From here, authorities requested formal DNA testing. A DNA sample was taken and the results returned within days. The young man living as Nicholas Barclay was not Nicholas. He was Frédéric Bourdin, a 23-year-old French national who had built an elaborate deception around a missing child's identity. He was arrested and later charged with passport fraud and perjury. Nicholas Barclay, meanwhile, was still missing. After his arrest, Frédéric Bourdin admitted the deception. He was eventually convicted, served a short prison sentence, and was deported from the United States. In later interviews, he described his actions as the result of an overwhelming need for identity and belonging. He said that assuming new identities allowed him to enter families and communities he had never truly experienced himself. Psychologists who later studied the case described him as an extreme example of identity manipulation, someone capable of carefully observing human behaviour and exploiting grief and hope. As investigators looked back on the case, a difficult question remained. If the differences between Frédéric Bourdin and Nicholas were so obvious, how had the deception lasted for months? Some detectives began examining the circumstances of Nicholas Barclay's disappearance itself. There were theories suggesting that the family dynamic may have been complicated, and that Nicholas's disappearance might involve more than originally understood. However, no evidence has ever proven the Barclay family knowingly accepted an imposter. No one in the family was charged with any crime connected to Nicholas's disappearance either. The theories remain speculation, discussed by investigators and journalists, while the truth about what happened to Nicholas Barclay remains unknown. At its core, this story is not only about deception, it is also about belief. When someone we love disappears, the need for answers can overpower doubt, and grief can blur the boundaries between certainty and possibility. Frédéric Bourdin did not simply steal an identity. He stepped into a space defined by hope, uncertainty, and longing, and for a brief moment, that was enough. To this day, Nicholas Barclay has never been found, and for several months in 1997, a stranger was allowed to take his place. Not because the evidence supported it, but because sometimes the desire to believe is stronger than the need to know.